Is Donald Trump a Russian agent? Welcome to Deep Dives, where we explore complex questions surrounding world leaders and global politics. I'm your host, and today we're examining a question that has perplexed political analysts, intelligence officials, and everyday citizens for years. Is Donald Trump a Russian agent? To be clear, we're not here to make definitive accusations or to pretend we have access to classified intelligence. Instead, we're going to walk through a fascinating timeline of events, examine public statements, and analyze relationships spanning decades that have led many to wonder about the nature of Donald Trump's unusual relationship with Vladimir Putin and Russia. Let's start with a scene that shocked the world. Picture this: Helsinki, 2018. Two of the world's most powerful men stand side by side at a press conference. When asked about Russian interference in the 2016 election, the President of the United States publicly states that he believes Vladimir Putin over his own intelligence agencies. Watching this unfold was Steve Bannon, Trump's former chief strategist, who turned to author Michael Wolff and said, "Putin has something on Trump. What is it?" Even Trump's closest advisors couldn't explain it. So what's really going on? Let's find out. The early years, the Soviet connection. Our story begins not in 2016, not even in the 2000s, but nearly 4 decades ago, in 1986, during the final years of the Cold War. According to Guardian foreign correspondent Luke Harding's book, Collusion, Trump may have been identified as a confidential contact by the KGB in the spring of 1986. What does this mean? Not necessarily that he was a spy, but perhaps someone the Soviet intelligence apparatus viewed as potentially useful. In Trump's own autobiography, The Art of the Deal, he reveals a curious encounter. In September 1986, he found himself seated next to Soviet Ambassador Yuri Dubinin at a luncheon. Trump wrote that Dubinin's daughter Natalia had read about Trump Tower and knew all about it. One thing led to another, and now I'm talking about building a large luxury hotel across the street from the Kremlin in partnership with the Soviet government. But there's something peculiar about this meeting. The seating arrangement at the luncheon might not have been accidental. Dubinin had arrived in the United States just 6 months earlier, and remarkably, his daughter took him directly from the airport, on his very first day in America, to Trump Tower on Fifth Avenue. Natalia later recalled how her father, who was fluent in English and known as a brilliant negotiator, immediately began flattering Trump. "The first thing I saw in the city was your tower." Trump melted at once. He is an emotional person, somewhat impulsive. He needs recognition, and of course, when he gets it, he likes it. "My father's visit worked on him like nectar to a bee." Within weeks of this meeting, Dubinin was rapidly appointed ambassador to the United States. A coincidence? Or something more calculated? Then came July 1987. Trump and his then-wife Ivana flew to Moscow for the first time, a visit Trump later described as an extraordinary experience. The couple stayed in the Lenin Suite at the National Hotel, directly across from the Kremlin. What happened during this visit? We don't know the details. But what we do know is that something changed when Trump returned to America. In September of that same year, Trump, who until then had been focused almost exclusively on real estate development in New York City, suddenly developed a profound interest in foreign policy. He paid nearly $95,000 to run a full-page advertisement in the New York Times, where he harshly criticized U.S. foreign policy under both Republican and Democratic presidents. There's nothing wrong with America's foreign defense policy that a little backbone can't cure. The ad included an open letter from Trump to the American people, detailing why America should stop paying to defend countries that can afford to defend themselves. From the Kremlin's perspective, this would have been a rather helpful position, one that has now grown into Republican Party doctrine. That same day, the New York Times reported that Trump had given vague hints that he might run as a Republican candidate in the 1988 presidential election. He ultimately didn't run, but a political seed had been planted. In recent years, some former Soviet intelligence officers have made explosive claims. Al-Nur Musayev claimed on Facebook that Trump was recruited by the KGB in 1987 and given the codename Krasnov. The Guardian reported similar allegations from Yuri Shvets, another former KGB spy, who compared Trump to infamous British double agents Burgess, McLean, Philby, and Blunt, who passed secrets to Moscow during the Cold War. Are these claims true? We simply don't know. But the timeline raises questions that are difficult to ignore. Financial troubles and Russian money. Let's fast forward to the early 1990s. Trump's business empire was crumbling. His Trump Taj Mahal casino in Atlantic City declared bankruptcy. The prestigious Plaza Hotel in New York suffered the same fate. Trump Shuttle, his airline venture, shut down completely in 1992. Trump's reputation as a business failure made him persona non grata to most major American lenders. But somehow, he managed to mount a remarkable comeback. How? According to multiple investigations, including one by the New York Times in 2018, the answer appears to be with the help of foreign money, particularly from wealthy Russians. The New York Times investigation found that Trump relied heavily on funds from wealthy individuals from Russia and elsewhere with questionable and even criminal backgrounds. This money reportedly flowed through offshore shell companies and various entities often used to disguise beneficial ownership. One striking example emerges from Sunny Isles Beach, Florida, an area nicknamed Little Moscow. Trump-branded condominiums there were sold to 60 individuals with Russian passports or addresses who purchased nearly $100 million worth of units. Among these buyers were Russian government officials and at least one Ukrainian who later pleaded guilty to money laundering charges involving a former Ukrainian prime minister. Donald Trump Jr. appeared to confirm the family's financial reliance on Russian money when he stated in 2008, "Russians make up a pretty disproportionate cross-section of a lot of our assets." It's important to note that having Russian investors doesn't automatically imply political influence or compromise. And in 2018, Trump did expel 60 Russian diplomats from the United States. Still, the financial entanglements raise questions about potential leverage. The Steele dossier and compromat allegations. In 2016, as Trump campaigned for president, a document began circulating in intelligence and journalistic circles that would eventually become infamous. The Steele dossier. Christopher Steele, a former MI6 officer with extensive experience in Russian affairs, had compiled a series of memos containing explosive allegations. The dossier claimed that Russian intelligence possessed compromising material, or compromat, on Trump that could be used to blackmail him. A senior Russian federal security agent reportedly told Steele in June 2016, Trump's unorthodox behavior in Russia over the years had provided the authorities there with enough embarrassing material on the now Republican presidential candidate to be able to blackmail him if they wished. The dossier contained allegations about events that supposedly took place in 2013 at the presidential suite of the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Moscow. The specific details are salacious and unverified, and we won't repeat them here. How credible is the Steele dossier? This remains hotly debated. Some allegations were found to be untrue or lacking sufficient evidence. Others, however, have been corroborated. U.S. intelligence agencies and the 2019 Mueller report confirmed some of Steele's broader claims, such as that the Russian government was working to get Mr. Trump elected, that Russia sought to cultivate people in Trump's orbit, and that many Trump campaign officials and associates had numerous secretive contacts with Russian officials and agents. Other verified claims included that Putin favored Trump over Hillary Clinton, and that he personally ordered an influence campaign to harm Clinton's election chances and to undermine public faith in the U.S. democratic process. Again, this raises the question, why did Putin favor Trump? The presidency and puzzling behavior. Throughout his presidency, Trump displayed a pattern of behavior toward Russia and Putin that left observers across the political spectrum perplexed. Consider this. No world leader uses social media like Trump. He casually baits, attacks, and belittles fellow world leaders almost daily. Dozens of his closest allies have been criticized, and their heads of state rebuked sharply. Yet Vladimir Putin remained the indisputable exception. Why? Professor Timothy Snyder, an American historian, notes that the main way Russia engages with the United States is through constant attempts to destabilize American society, through unceasing cyber war, while Russian state-controlled TV is full of fantasies of the destruction of the United States. Why would one turn friends into rivals and pretend that a rival is a friend? It's not about economic benefits either. Snyder points out, the economies of America's present allies are at least 20 times larger than the Russian economy, and Russian trade was never very important to the United States. Why would one fight trade wars with prosperous friends in exchange for access to an essentially irrelevant market? Then came that infamous moment in Helsinki in 2018. Standing beside Putin at a press conference, Trump told an incredulous gathering of the world's media that when it came to allegations of election interference, he believed Putin over his own intelligence agencies. Michael Wolff, who was present with Steve Bannon watching this unfold, later told BBC viewers that this US foreign policy pivot appeared to be to keep Vladimir Putin happy. When asked why, he simply responded, "Why is the question?" The Ukraine crisis and Zelensky confrontation. The Russia-Ukraine war has reignited speculation about Trump's ties to Putin. In a recent press conference featuring both Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, the tension became palpable when a Polish journalist asked the key question. "My friends in Poland are worried you align yourself too much with Putin. What's your message for them?" Trump struggled to provide a coherent answer. "If I didn't align myself with both of them, you'd never have a deal. You want me to say really terrible things about Putin and then say, 'Hi Vladimir, how are we doing on the deal?' It doesn't work that way. I'm not aligned with Putin. I'm not aligned with anybody. I'm aligned with the United States of America, and for the good of the world. I'm aligned with the world." The inconsistency in this statement seemed lost on Trump. He had already said plenty of harsh things about Zelensky on multiple occasions, even accusing him of being a dictator, yet still expected the Ukrainian president to negotiate with him. Trump finished by saying, "You want me to be tough? I can be tougher than any human being you've ever seen. I'd be so tough, but you're never going to get a deal that way." Yet just 5 minutes later, he was verbally battering Zelensky. The situation deteriorated further when Vice President J.D. Vance intervened, claiming that, for 4 years in the United States of America, we had a president who stood up at press conferences and talked tough about Vladimir Putin, and then Putin invaded Ukraine and destroyed a significant chunk of the country. The path to peace and the path to prosperity is maybe engaging in diplomacy. We tried the pathway of Joe Biden, of thumping our chest and pretending that the President of the United States' words meant more than the President of the United States' actions. What makes America a good country is engaging in diplomacy. That's what President Trump is doing. The suggestion that Ukraine hadn't previously engaged in diplomacy was demonstrably false and seemed to provoke Zelensky, who attempted to explain that Putin had already broken 25 ceasefire agreements, including a full and comprehensive one signed in 2019 with President Macron and Chancellor Merkel. What followed was described as a shouting match between Trump and Vance, competing to see who could more effectively berate the Ukrainian president. Vance later told Fox News that he had been trying to diffuse the situation a little bit. So much for the U.S. engaging in diplomacy. The investigation and unanswered questions. The U.S. Senate Intelligence Committee recently questioned Trump's nominees for NATO representatives and asked directly if President Trump was a Russian asset. Senator Jeff Merkley, a Democrat from Oregon, wanted to know what a Russian asset embedded as POTUS would do differently from what Trump is already doing. The nominees struggled to provide an answer. Even technology has weighed in on the question. Newsweek reported that Elon Musk's AI chatbot Grok concluded that Trump is 85% likely to be a Russian asset, based on publicly available information. But what does that actually mean? Nobody seems to believe he's a Russian agent in the traditional sense of a trained operative. However, many argue he functions as an asset, someone who advances Russian interests, whether knowingly or unknowingly. Trump has always denied any improper relationship with Russia or Putin, and it's entirely possible that the famously self-centered 47th President of the United States is simply being manipulated by the Kremlin without fully realizing it. So, we return to our original question. Is Donald Trump a Russian agent? The most accurate answer may be that we still don't know, and may never know with certainty. What we do have is a pattern spanning decades, Early contacts with Soviet officials in the 1980s, a mysterious first trip to Moscow, followed by sudden interest in foreign policy, financial rescue by Russian money in the 1990s, unverified but persistent allegations of compromising material, consistent, unexplained deference to Putin throughout his presidency, aggressive posturing toward Ukraine, which aligns with Russian interests. Governments around the world continue to struggle to understand how Trump hopes to benefit from a rapprochement with Russia. Political commentators remain baffled, as do members of his own party. Even appointees from his first administration don't know the answer, and Trump himself never gives a coherent explanation for his strategy. Perhaps the most disturbing possibility is that there is no strategy at all, just an inexplicable loyalty that transcends logic, national interest, and 4 decades of American foreign policy. Whatever the truth may be, the question itself, is Donald Trump a Russian agent, has become one of the most consequential mysteries in modern American politics. This has been Deep Dives. I'm your host, and I thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this exploration, please subscribe for more in-depth analyses of the stories shaping our world.